Well, good evening. So many of you have been my students in classes, and you have been exposed to supply chain concepts, and some of you have not. So this time, this is the last lecture, so that I'm going to leave with you, hopefully, good dosage of supply chain principles. And for those of you who have taken my classes, there was somewhat of a review, but also is looking at it in a more structured way. Yeah, so hopefully everybody would benefit from this last lecture. Yes. The title that I want to share with you is the AAA supply chain. Now, I think some of you may know that I have written an article in the late 2004, which has exactly the same title on the AAA supply chain in the Harvard Business Review. I wanted to use that same framework, but hopefully given more of the current thinking about these subjects and some of the latest examples and perspective on how companies, I think companies, enterprises in both product companies or service companies or any organizations need to have these 3A kind of characteristics. I think this is applicable whether you're talking about producing a car or computer or whether you are serving a need of some type of services. The AAA concepts, I think, hopefully would be useful, yes. So why AAA? AAA is necessary mainly because I think it's also an exciting title when you talk about single A. That's not exciting, yeah, single A these days, especially, of course, GSB doesn't use ABC as grades, but in other parts of campuses, we do use A and B and C, and these days with great inflation, having an A is nothing to be proud of, yeah. You need multiple A's, yeah, so that's why AAA bonds is usually considered to be a sign of excellence. And I do believe that companies that want to be excellent supply chain type of companies or service companies need to possess three what I call properties. And these three properties all start with the letter A, and that's why I call them AAA supply chain. Interestingly, is that I think those companies that have these three properties would also have AAA type of performance in terms of excellence. Okay. So just to prepare you, I wanted to show you maybe some recent studies in 2003 that was jointly conducted by Stanford University and INSEAD with also participation from Accenture, which of course provided a lot of financial help, and that's important. The study was looking at whether companies who are considered to be excellent in supply chain performance, and by supply chains are usually what I meant is like inventory turn, speed, cycle time, cost, that kind of performance related to how well you support your operations, and whether those would be related to financial ultimate market performance. So this is the two things that we want to know, is that if you work hard and getting cycle time down and inventory turn good and so on, would you be rewarded? Is it related, actually, in the perfect performance in the market? And so the simple relationship that we look at is if a company has either improved in your supply chain performances or declined or maintained the same level, what happened to their market cap? And there are four kinds of companies in this diagram here. First is what I call supply chain leaders. These are companies that have always performed well in the beginning of the 90s and the second part of the 90s. Companies that are called transformers are those that did not perform well, but later on they have improved. Laggards are the ones that have always performed below industry average. And the decliners used to perform well in the beginning of the 90s, but then they have declined. And sure enough, there is a correlation. The correlation is that indeed those companies that seem to perform well in the supply chain have also enjoyed higher than industry average in market caps. And of course, the decliners have been heavily penalized by the market because of their performance. So there is no clear causality relationship, but definitely there is a correlation. Similarly, some colleagues of mine at Georgia Tech has done some study looking at the so-called supply chain glitches. By glitches, what they meant is that there were some reported problems that these companies have, either because of shortages or because of something is not enough capacity running down. And they found that those glitches oftentimes resulted in significant underperformance compared to a comparable company in the same sector. So they paired them up and found that even before or after those incidents, there are significant underperformance as a result of these glitches. So all this means is that companies do need to, it's important for them to have good design, good marketing, everything, good setup leadership, but you also have to have a good engine to deliver products to deliver orders to satisfy your customers. So today, why was it the case that it's so difficult for companies to manage their supply chain well? Now, I think, of course, this is self-serving. I think there are three major trends that make things difficult. Yeah, and there are three. Three is an easy number to remember. Yeah, so three things. So the first one is that there's increasing uncertainty. The market is very uncertain. The world is easy if everything is predictable. The second one is that things are changing rapidly. Product life cycles are shorter and shorter, and so yes, you may found a good solution for this product, but the next product has just come out. You are at the end of the product life cycle as soon as you introduce a new product. When product life cycles are 3 months long, 4 months long, that's the kind of rapid changes that we're talking about. The technology will also changing rapidly. And third, very few companies can do it all. That you have to depend on many partners to produce a product or make a service. And so there are many, many players that you have to depend on, and those players have their own self-interest too, and they may not see eye to eye with you, and you have to make sure that their interest somehow, hopefully, is aligned with yours. So because of these three challenges, that's why I think we need three properties. And those three properties, remember, there is a test at the end of this last lecture series. There's a last exam, which is what are these three? The third, I think, is that when the world is so uncertain, it's very hard for us to forecast what's going to be the next product, next season, next fashion. And so instead of trying to improve your forecasting, maybe we should ensure that we would just respond fast and flexible, responsive. So agility is the first property to replace the ability to forecast well. The second one is what I called adaptability. So when the world is changing rapidly, maybe there is no perfect supply chain that you can speak of. Yes, should we be manufacturing in Mexico or should we be manufacturing in China? That might be the best solution for today. And very rapidly, when you have new technologies and when you have a new product, you may have to adapt to a new way of running your process. And the third one is alignment, meaning that we have to make sure that we have to identify both perhaps performance measures, reward structures, risk sharing kind of schemes to ensure that our partners and we would be synchronized to go north together, to go west together, so that we would not be going in opposite direction. So those are the three that I think are important. So let me elaborate a little more on these three, and the rest of the talk is more about exactly what these three are about and why. In fact, hopefully you'll see why these three properties are important. First one, agility. So agility is important because, as I said, that there is no way you can exactly forecast the world in perfection, given the fact that you have so many products and the world is changing so rapidly. So the best way is to create a responsive engine. Now here, I think is very, very nice framework that I think is useful is the so-called Six Sigma process. So Six Sigma process, which was used in quality control or which is used in general management, is actually quite applicable in defining a responsive and agile supply chain. Six Sigma process says that usually, this is the industry world of looking at what Six Sigma process is about, is to measure. So first measure to see what's happening in your enterprise or your quality process. So you measure. Second is that from measurement, you derive what's wrong potentially or whether things are going in the right direction. So you learn about the process. So once you learn about the process, you identify what could be something that you need to do to fix. And when you respond, you better respond with the right action. So you analyze to know which is the right action, and you must respond fast. Because if you are responding too slow, that opportunity would be over. And once you finish action, you measure again to see whether that action does it, or whether you now enter into a different kind of state. And therefore, when the next time when you go and measure, you are comparing the so-called status quo, which is different from before. So this Sigma process, I think, is a good concept for us to see. Say, if we want to be an agile supply chain, we must measure. We must measure to learn about the changes fast, rapidly. So IBM has called this kind of process, this is an IBM consulting type of terminologies, they call this sense and response, which is the way to do agility, is to sense. Agile means you must know before everyone else does whether there has been some changes in pattern, changes in demand, changes in supply conditions, fast sensing, and also fast response. So sense and response was the key. However, I think IBM, of course, yeah, this is the IBM term, and I always would not just use other people's, especially consultants, concepts directly. Yeah. So the value add of a professor is to reprocess and come up with better things. So, and you see that this is better. Hopefully you agree with me. Yeah. What I think IBM is not enough is that sense is not enough. Because most of the times, when people talk about an agile supply chain, sensing is important. Sensing means sensing, finding out what's going on. How do we get sensors? Wow, we have to trap information. We have to find out what's going on in the market. We have to find out what's going on in the suppliers, customers. And you use all kinds of technologies, internet, e-business, or barcode, RFID, radio frequency identification. So you use as many technologies as you can to try to find out what's going on. Sensing is important, but only if you can make sense out of sense. Don't you agree? Yeah, only after sensing all this information, you will be overloaded, you will be overwhelmed, because the best information is useless unless you really understand what's behind it. So that's why I think sense and response is insufficient. Here is, I think, what is most powerful is that you need to make sense out of sense. Yeah, it's not because I'm just redundant. I think, yeah, you agree with me. This is powerful stuff, sense out of sense. Why do we need to make sense out of sense? Because in general, when you sense what's going on in the market, there are lots and lots of noises, and there are lots and lots of bad data. Information that you thought you are sensing about what's going on, the market demand, customers' preferences, all could be polluted. There's a lot of distortion going on. There is a lot of bullwhip going on. Those of you who have taken the core operations will remember this term. Yeah, bullwhip. Everyone coming out of this graduate school of business must know bullwhip, right? Yes. If you don't know what bullwhip is, yeah, you cannot be awarded a degree. So bullwhip is important. What is bullwhip? Bullwhip is the distortion of the market. So when people observe a signal, they reprocess it, and they oftentimes exaggerate or somehow distort the signal, so that when the signal is passed on to another stage, it's distorted. So how can you just blindly sense? If you sense without sense, you would be misled, and there would be a lot of bad signals. You need to know who is your customer, really your customers. Maybe that customers, if you know truly your customers, you would use different sense out of it. Use very different sense. Yeah, I remember that a few years ago, I was invited to be a keynote speaker at a very major conference, supply chain conference. So that's my field, and so I was a keynote speaker, so I was very excited to give a keynote. But then later on, I discovered that before my speech, this conference organizer has organized another keynote speaker ahead of me. So I said, gee, this supply chain conference, who could be better than I am? Yeah, supply chain, right, yeah, I'm the real expert. So I find out that it was Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson was the other keynote speaker. So I said, gee, what does Magic Johnson know about supply chain? How could he be a keynote speaker ahead of me? I thought maybe they want to warm up the podium, have Magic Johnson warm up the podium, warm up the audience so that they would be ready to receive the real message. Yeah, coming from me, of course, yeah. Fascinating thing is that I think I learned something from Magic Johnson. I really learned something from him. Of course, he did not know much about supply chain, but he gave a lecture, a short lecture, about 15 minutes long, kind of a speech that I really have learned something from him. I now admire him a lot more, yes, definitely. So what Magic Johnson said is that, yeah, everyone, I'm no supply chain expert, and I don't know why they invited me to speak, yeah. But anyway, I have a simple message to you. The simple message is that you thought you knew your customers, you may not. That's it. Very simple knowledge. A lot of people thought they knew their customers, and when they read signals, interpret, and sense, you may not know exactly your customers. And so he shared with an experience. He said, after I retired from basketball and I have money to invest, I invested in one of the investments that I made is in cinemas. I invested in cinemas, building cinemas. In cinemas, these cinemas, I like to invest cinemas in inner city. Inner city, because oftentimes in the city, kids and young people or people were deprived of having a cinema. They oftentimes have to travel to downtown, expensive places, suburbs, to watch a movie. So he wanted to invest in inner city to have cinemas so that the inner city people can have access to cinema. But of course, he didn't know anything about cinema. So he purchased a property, it's an old cinema and old place, and tried to remodel it into a cinema. And because he has no knowledge about cinemas, so he hired an expert. This expert, this manager, has 35 years of experience of running cinemas. So he said, wow, gee, good, yeah, we have an expert to take care of this. Yeah, so that person called a shot and do all the remodelings and take care of things. So the night before the opening night, Magic Johnson went to the cinema and checked things out. And he walked around, wow, everything seems to be in great order. And so he's excited about this new opening of his first cinema. And then he stopped at the food store. As you know, yeah, food is very important in cinemas. That's how they make money. It's selling you popcorns and the sodas, yes, and the ice creams, candy bars. And he checked, wow, food, fully stuffed, yeah, fully stocked with candy bars, etc. And then he discovered that there were only 50 hot dogs. And Magic Johnson asked his manager, he said, only 50 hot dogs? Did you notice that? It seems low, isn't it? We have a cinema that can seat hundreds of people. And this manager says that, Mr. Johnson, trust me, I have 35 years of experience. Much more than you. Of course, you have 0, yeah. So trust me, cinema people don't come to watch a movie eating hot dogs. People come to a cinema, have popcorns, have candy bars, and sodas. They don't come here to eat hot dogs. 50 is more than enough. Guess what? The next day, even before the movie began, they ran out. They ran out of stock of the hot dogs. And so Magic Johnson's point is that the manager thought that he knew the customers, but in fact, it turns out the bulk of the customers who came to watch the movie in his theater were people who, of course, could not afford to have a nice dinner after the movie or before the movie. If you are in a nice downtown area, suburb kind of cinemas, people watch a movie and then they go out to eat, or and have another snack, a nice snack, a bar. So, of course, while they're in the cinema, they don't eat a meal. They would have just a popcorn or a soda because they are going to have a meal, or either before or after. But a lot of the customers of Magic Johnson's cinema were people who could not afford to have a meal plus a movie. So for them, that entertainment is the movie and the meal must be together. That's what they can afford. And hot dog is a very nice way to have a meal when you spend money already on the ticket of the movie. And so that's a very simple lesson, a powerful lesson. You thought you knew the customers, may not. And that's why you need to make sense out of sense. So here is what I think is a powerful revision of IBM's sense and response. It's sensible sense and responsive response. I like it, yeah. It's very powerful. I'm going to trademark this so that anybody who uses it now have to pay me, yeah. So what is sensible sense? Sensible sense is when you sense information about what's the market, what's the supply, what's the condition. But I must say, just mentioning to you is that you could set up a lot of antenna. So the preparedness means that you set up a lot of antenna to find out what's going on. Yeah, market conditions, we know. Supplier, are they late? We know. But you must make knowledge out of that information. So that's a sensible sense. Maybe some of them are noises you throw away. Don't use it. Sensible sense. So this is the activation part, which is once the data comes in, you have to create intelligence and smartness of it. Second portion is the response. When you talk about response, companies also invest a lot in extra capacity, supplier relationship. But again, until the action happens so that you can indeed respond fast, response is no use. Yeah, unless you can have fast response. There is always, I remember there was a common joke in the Silicon Valley. In 1999, there was a common joke that people say, why do people have to spend so much efforts and money to deal with Y2K? Why? As you know, in 1998, 1999, a lot of companies invested a lot of IT budgets to prepare for Y2K. So the common saying was that, why should we worry about Y2K? What we need to do is to have a very fast information system so that as soon as New Zealand hit Y2K, you have information immediately knowing, did they sink or did they not? Yeah, is the country intact? What is the problem? Yeah, what kind of things we need to do? That is a very interesting, it's a joke, of course. It's a good strategy if your response is so fast. If you can have, in 8 hours, you can change your information systems, then of course, don't invest in anything now. Just wait until you watch. If New Zealand doesn't, still the country is intact, then you don't need to do anything. So sense and response, your response is only good if you are responsive, if you're fast. So I think the color portion is the one that most companies miss, which is what I meant, is that you need sensible sense and you need responsive response. So that's about it, So those of you who have taken the course in the information technology course, remember the company Zara. This company is an amazing company, and because I think they are truly an agile company with sensible sense and responsive response. So they are able to get information fast from the market, and they're able to utilize the information to make it into knowing what the fashion trends are, and then manufacture fast, manufacture and distribute fast. Distribution is fast. Distribution is amazingly fast within Zara. Every day they're distributing everything out of 2 distribution centers. And because speed is important, which is why this company has a nickname, or a Wall Street Journal call them fashion on demand. They could create fashion in a quick, short time. Another example is, again, for those of you who have taken that course, remember the 7-Eleven Japan. 7-Eleven Japan is a fascinating, amazing company which also have sensible sense and responsive response. How do they do sensible sense? I'll give you 2 examples, and you would be impressed by this company, 7-Eleven Japan. What they did is that a lot of companies says that, well, sense is easy for a retailer. You just get point of sales data quickly. You get point of sales data quickly and send it back to the headquarters so that we know today 7-Up is selling. Tomorrow maybe Coca-Cola is selling. And then you replenish fast. That's the Walmart kind of strategy, is to get point of sales data fast. Process them, send them back to the distribution center, and the distribution center replenishes fast. So that would be good enough, yes. But 7-Eleven Japan decided that that is just sense. We need to have sensible sense. Sensible sense would be one example that really is truly a very powerful one, and a few of you may still remember, but it's a year ago, so maybe not too many of you will remember. So you will still be enjoying this excellent example now. So what happened is that about 7 years ago, 7-Eleven started to sell very well lady stockings. Pantyhose was selling like crazy. They're very good at selling pantyhose in 7-Eleven Japan. Which of course, to me is weird, right? Why would the Japanese want to buy pantyhose at the convenience store and not at the department store? They were the number 1 in the country, the best seller of pantyhose. A lot of them are selling at 7-Eleven. So one of the vice president of 7-Eleven Japan proposed to the CEO, say, hey, look, Mr. Suzuki, Suzuki-san, did you know that we are doing so well in lady stocking? I think there is an opportunity. This is sense, and let's respond, by sensing, So the response is that let's create a larger cosmetic section. Cosmetic section to sell lipsticks and shampoo, to take advantage of the fact that we are doing so well in lady stocking. Mr. Suzuki is a very smart man. Mr. Suzuki says that sounds like a good idea, but before we move, of course, he wasn't using my terminologies, but it's the same, I think, and I'm sure he would agree with me. So he says that we have to make sure that what we are sensing is correct. We are sensing is correct. So go and make sure who are the customers. Who are the customers buying pantyhose? Because if they are women, then of course, we expand the cosmetic section. Now, at first, this vice president says that seems like a dumb question. Who are the customers of pantyhose? Of course, they are women. Yes, it's obvious. But in Japan, you dare not challenge the boss. Right? You don't say, what a dumb question. Instead, you would say, what a great question, Mr. Suzuki. Wow, brilliance. Wow, how come I didn't think of it? So let me go and do it. So this vice president went off and researched. And what he found, as you know, in 7-Eleven, Japan, they actually, when they check out at the checkout counter, not only do they just scan your item so as to trap your point of sales data, but they also are required, this is a very, very unique retail chain in the world, every checkout counter person, the teller, or the checkout counter person there, has to estimate the age of the customer and then input it. So they're required because they know it's so important to know who are the customers. Not only are we interested in sales, we are interested in who are the customers behind that sale. So you have to estimate. You have to estimate by classifying in the groups. They have a special kind of machine, checkout machine that says 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40, 50. So you have to estimate. Okay, this person, 25 years old, and so you have to put in a button. And the second thing is that you secondly have to estimate the gender of the customer. Yes, so you estimate, okay, probably not too hard, yeah. So you can't ask, of course you cannot say, can you tell me your gender and age before you buy this sushi? Yeah, no, so you estimate. So they were having this data. So when Mr. Suzuki asked that question, it's actually very easy. They went back and immediately do some analysis. To their surprise, that the bulk of the sales of the pantyhose happened between 7 to 9 p.m. at night, and a lot of the customers were men. Strange, isn't it, Steve? Ken, yeah, you seem perplexed. Yeah. Yes, right, yeah. Okay, good job, good point, yeah. So in fact, there was a reason, of course, because a lot of them, Japan, we still have a lot of male working and female staying home kind of still. This is the social norm. And so it's very, very convenient for the wives to ask the husbands to go out on the way back home, because most of them also commute to work. That's a majority, yeah, not driving is not as kind of common. Yeah. So every subway station, train station, there is a 7-Eleven store. So on the way home, honey, yeah, why don't you pick up half a dozen of these pantyhose, black and size 38, yeah, I don't know whether it's numbered. I'm not a customer, you can tell, yeah. So they would shop for their wives, and the Japanese work hard, work very late, long hours. So by the time they got home, it's 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and they're exhausted. But their wife asked them to pick up pantyhose, so they have to stop by and pick up pantyhose. So once they find out this is putting intelligence in the sense, Mr. Suzuki asked the vice president, should we still expand the cosmetic section? No, the vice president says, no need now. Let's move all the pantyhose next to the beer section. Yeah. See, sensible sense would create smart response, yeah. If you are not fast and you're not responsive, you would fall into the victim of what happened to Ericsson in the year 2000 when there was a fire in the Albuquerque. The fire, not destroyed, but it's just a small fire in the clean room of the Philips semiconductor factory. Of course, it's a very, very clean room, you know, even if it's not a big fire. But once the fireman came in with the hose and water, yeah, you are disabled for a long time. So Nokia was able to identify the information, and the CEO next day immediately sent a squad of vice presidents out because they have been burned before. Yeah, so they know that it's important for them, yeah, to react by knowing what exactly is going on. So you need sense, and then immediately develop a strategy to take advantage of the extra capacity of Philips in Singapore and Eindhoven, change the design of the product so that they can make use of other processes. And in the end, they did not suffer any shortages. But Ericsson did not do sense nor good response, because they did not sense. The way it worked is that the Ericsson people also learned about the fire. And so they asked Philips, yeah, what happened? Did you have a severe fire? And the Philips people, of course, has an interest to try to de-emphasize the seriousness of the problem. And so the Ericsson was told by Philips, yeah, there was a fire, but it was put out in less than half an hour. So it's no big deal. Please go back to sleep. Yeah, don't worry here. And they, by the time when they learn about the seriousness of this clean room problems, it's too late. All the capacity of Philips have been taken by Nokia. So Ericsson suffered $500 million loss, 4.5 billion kroners because of one fire. So that's important. Second, adaptability. Adaptability, I'll use an example that some of you in the global operations will remember, is Lucent. In the 80s and the 90s, Lucent used a strategy of a supply chain of concentrated manufacturing. Concentrated manufacturing means that they would concentrate manufacture in a single location, in that case in Oklahoma City. Why? Because they said most of the customers are in the U.S. and most of the suppliers are in the U.S. So let's take advantage of economies of scale, risk pooling, centralized procurement, centralized kitting, centralized manufacturing. That's the way to take control of the technologies. In the 90s, they discovered that that would not work. That would not work because most of the suppliers had moved to Asia. And the fastest growing market is in Asia, is in India, is in Taiwan, is in China. So what they found is that George Fu, the vice president of manufacturing, once told me is that they have a supply chain strategy that sucks. Yeah. And because they would fly all these components from Asia to Oklahoma City, store them, and then eventually put them together, final assembly, kit them, test them, and then fly them back to Asia. And so it add cost, it add time, and the worst thing is that they all did not earn any frequent flyer miles. So it was lose, 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 yeah. So anyway, so they changed. They changed the supply chain. In 1996, they moved manufacturing to Taiwan. They moved manufacturing to Taiwan because then the Asian hub can serve the Asian market and can do the procurements. There was no need for them to fly things around. It was a very successful strategy. But then I think adaptation is never there's no end to an adaptation. You should constantly adapt because the world is changing all the time. So when the technology is in the early days and the concentrated supply and demand, the Lucent strategies of focused manufacturing, focused in Oklahoma City worked like a charm. Later on, as demand becomes more widespread and suppliers are also widespread, they have this regional expanded network strategy. That also is fine. But when the technology is fully mature, what happens is that a lot of the outsourced manufacturers can do the job equally well, and they have maybe lower cost structure. So what Lucent has to do is to change the value chain by outsourcing. You don't need to do it all yourself, which is what Lucent did. What Lucent did is that they drastically started outsourcing recently because they recognized that holding on to manufacturing is a wrong strategy when the technology is fully mature. So you need to adapt. Another example of adaptation is a company called POSCO, which is a very successful steel manufacturer. They are not number one in the world in terms of size, but their profits is larger than number one, two, three, four added together. So the largest, they are number 4 in size, but if you add the top five except POSCO, add the total profits, POSCO has larger profit than the rest of them. So this company is successful. Well, there's some very interesting lessons that I think we can learn from POSCO. In the early days, POSCO used a centralized strategy, so-called continuous casting technology. Why? Because that saves energy and also is a very, very good process to enable you to do the steel, manufacture steel, casting, and the mills has been concentrated in Korea. Because the bulk of the demand, of course, in the early days, Korea was going through a rapid reconstruction after the Second World War, and so there is significant demand from Korea. But what happened is that today the world has changed. The world has changed because the ingredients, the inputs to making steel is not in Korea. Yeah, they're in Brazil, they are in Australia, and the cost has been going up. So controlling the source is important. Second is that transportation cost has also skyrocketed. And China is hungry for steel, as we all know. And China, even though the supply of steel has increased, but the demand of steel has increased even much higher. So competing with China is very hard. So what POSCO decided to do is that the old concentrated supply chain strategy has worked very well for them, but not anymore when you have to compete for inputs and when transportation cost is much higher than before. So what they did is disintegration. So they disintegrated their supply chain by having now factories forming joint ventures with the key suppliers, iron ores in Brazil, in Australia, where the iron ores are. So they build the iron ore, make them in the crude steel, and then do the finishing in the market being the US and China. Of course, there's some in Korea, but because the big markets, rapidly increasing markets, are in the US and China, why do I have to bring all these iron ore and coal into Korea and build them, and then you have to ship them to China and US? Very expensive. Remember transportation costs. So adaptation is another very important strategy. And POSCO is a successful company because they never just live with a single solution. They adapt. Final A. Final A is very important, alignment. This importance is because as we depend on our partners to make products and services, it's not sufficient for you to say, I am a really excellent company and I do the best operations. Because the weakest link of a supply chain defines a supply chain. If you have a supply chain and some of the partners are not working well, you would be vulnerable. So the weakest link, yeah. We're talking about supply chain to supply chain competitions. And we must make sure win-win. Win-win meaning everyone wins, not just one wins over small wins, yes. So importance to have win-win, absolutely important. So one example is Prius. Prius, of course, is a very successful hybrid that we all know. But when Toyota introduced the Prius first initially, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, Prius was not kind of a sure win. At that time, Toyota introduced a product talking to the dealers. Hey, Mr. Dealers, yeah, we want you to sell Prius. Will the product sell? We don't know. Yeah, it's very risky. Who knows, the Americans, would they care about this fuel-efficient car? It's very risky. And plus, the worst thing is that a lot of the parts were not common with Camry or with Corolla. So there's a separate set of spare parts. Just a battery charger is very expensive. So what Toyota says is that, yeah, retailers, dealers, I want you to sell Prius. We don't know whether the product will sell or not. But of course, once I ship you the Prius, according to the Toyota's agreement, like other cars, as soon as I ship, you own it. You pay me. If it doesn't sell, that's your problem. At least you pay me first. And plus, you have to invest in the spare parts. You have to invest in the chargers and a lot of new equipment. So what happened is that this is unequal risk. The risk is, of course, much higher for the small little dealers compared to a giant company like Toyota, who can absorb the risk much better. So the unequal risk means that Toyota could have their way, because they're a powerful company, and they could say, yeah, this is it, yeah, you have to do it, otherwise I'll kick you out of the dealership network. But they recognize that the dealers would be doing it grudgingly, and they may not work very hard for Prius. They would say, yeah, you come in, yeah, don't look at the Prius, yeah, let me show you Camry or Corolla equally good. So the incentives would not be aligned if they create this unequal risk sharing. So to the credit of Toyota, they modify this. They modify saying that for this product only, if you sell Prius, we take the risk of the product. For other cars, that's not the case. For other cars, Camry, as soon as we ship the Camry to you, you own the product, and if you cannot sell it, you mark down, you do whatever you want, that's your problem. You pay me first. But for Prius, I take ownership of the products. I have the product kept at the distribution center near the dock, near the port. When you have successfully sold Prius, I'll send it to you. Otherwise, yes, you don't have any risk. You only sell. You're an agent. And that is a balance of the risk. And it worked. As a result, the incentives were aligned, and the dealers are much more willing to work hard to get these products, because they also know there is no risk. I have much better margin, because I don't need to have to borrow money to finance the inventory for this car. This car, I have much better margin selling. So the dealers are incentivized to work hard. And then there was a side bonus. It turns out the side bonus was that if Toyota has been using the old regime, old methods of asking the dealers to take ownership, what do you think would be the estimate that they would use in terms of whether we should send more cars to the Northeast, to the Northwest, and the West Coast? They would use no better estimate except just use Camry or Corolla. That's what we are selling. So if the West Coast people, North California, there's 5 to 6% of the total U.S. market of Camry is in North California, we send 5 to 6% Prius to them. If the Southeast, which is the big oil state, Texas, Florida, has 20%, we send 20% there. But because this time they're not sending things out, they're centralizing, they will luck out. Because it turns out Prius demand is very different from the rest of the U.S., for the rest of the cars. Turns out that in the Prius case, North California takes 25% of the Prius market. So we North Californians are very conscientious, much more conscientious than the rest of the country. And in Southeast only got 6%. So in this case, Toyota lucked out. Because if they have sent it out to the wrong place, you can imagine that in the Southeast they have to do a lot of markdowns. And then in Northern California, they have to fight to get Prius. So this is important, risk. Another example of alignment is the so-called Supplier Hub. What is a Supplier Hub? The Supplier Hub is usually today, companies like Dell, used to be Compaq and HP, all of them, Cisco, all recognize they don't like inventory. Nobody likes inventory. So they set up a so-called hub, which is a warehouse next to them, very close to them, and ask the suppliers to send inventory there, but they don't own it. The Cisco would not own inventory. Dell would not own inventory. That inventory is still yours. Every morning when I go and pick up, then it becomes mine. But so when you ship, even if you're from the Asia, Singapore, you ship all the products, it's yours. You take ownership until I take it. So that's very much like a vending machine. Yeah, vending machine, the manufacturer has to make the products, send the product all the way to the vending machine. They still own the product until you pick and get it. So Cisco, Dell, all like this very much, yeah, because of course they don't have to buy the inventory into their factory, which they have to take ownership and subject to the risk. So they ask the supplier to bear the risk. But this is not fair, because some suppliers, of course, if you're Intel, you don't. It's not that bad a deal to take ownership. And Intel usually doesn't take ownership anyway. They're strong enough to say, no, I don't play this game. But if you're a small suppliers, you have to play according to the rule, and yet at the same time, you have to borrow money to finance inventory. A small supplier has to borrow money at a heavy interest rate. Because you're small, sometimes startup companies, and you have to finance your own inventory. It's very expensive. So in a way, it's not fair because the weakest player in the supply chain is shouldering a much bigger liability and cost. Yes, and so there's some statistic that I got from a company called World Chain that says that in the 2000s, a lot of companies are actually shifting the inventory burden to the suppliers. If you're a component manufacturer, supplier, semiconductor, they were shouldering a lot more inventory than before. And these are smaller guys than Dell, and yet they have borrowed money heavily. So this is not a good way to run the supply chain. So a new way is the following. A new way is that some financial intermediaries, used to be Silicon Valley Bank, Silicon Valley Bank created this solution. What Silicon Valley Bank says is that we'll buy the inventory from these small guys. We'll buy it. Because we are Silicon Valley Bank, we can finance the inventory at much better rate. We're a bank, so we can borrow money at a much lower interest rate than anybody else in the supply chain. And then we just finance the inventory. And when Dell needs it, we sell them to Dell. So in a way, everybody is better off because the interest rates, the difference of the interest rate is sufficient for you to pay Silicon Valley Bank a fee, and still you're better off. So today, GE Capital is doing it. UPS Capital, a lot of companies are rushing in to do this financial reengineering, is to try to correct some of the imbalance of the liabilities. So I think to sum up, and then I want to maybe open up for some questions, is that I think 3A, the first A is important, and the trick to do first A well, agility well, is to do sensible sense and responsive response. Yeah, so don't just sense and response. Make some sense out of sense and response. Second one, adaptive. Adaptive means that we must recognize there is a market condition change, there is a technology change, product lifecycle change, and you may have to change your solution in response to those change. And the third one is alignment. Alignment means that we look at the supply chain partners. Maybe we have to change who is responsible for what. Maybe we have to change the way we share risk, we share cost, and we share reward. Maybe we also have to expand the notion of performance measures. What is a performance measures? Once we are partnered and integrated, we cannot simply say, this is my territory, I measure only within my territory, and that's yours. Maybe we have to have some joint ownership of some performance measures because we're integrated, because we want to make sure we are aligned interests. So that's alignment. So three things here. It's very simple. First, agility, sensible sense and response. Adaptive based on market conditions or product life cycles, technology cycles. Alignment, which is the exchange of responsibility, decision right, sharing risk and cost and rewards, and redefining performance measures. So to me, those are the three properties, and hopefully more companies would recognize these three A's to become AAA performance as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Questions?
I got one.
Yes, sir.
So I guess you've spoken to a lot of these different companies. I'm thinking back to the original chart that you'd shown, the difference between a leader and a laggard. What about those companies, in your opinion, having perhaps spent time with both of them? What's the difference between the two of them in terms of their management or their practice?
I think certainly, number one is that companies need to recognize that supply chain matters. Yes, looking at the supply chain, looking at the whole order fulfillment process, and not just think that this is a necessary evil. Yeah, so that's number one. So number two is that usually what I found those successful companies are where the C-level people are the one who are spending time understanding these order fulfillment processes, understanding the operations, to try to create a corporate-wide awareness and initiatives. Yes, and the third one is that there's not a fixed target. It's not like, yes, we arrive there and so very happy, let's all celebrate. Yeah, so it's a continuous thing. So it's very much a continuous the Kaizen kind of mentality. So continuous improvement is necessary. So I think in a way you can say that a lot of these are culture. It's a corporate culture. The company having the culture of looking into the supply chain issues and not delegated to say, hey, we C-level only worry about the mergers, acquisitions, and investments. Let somebody else manage this actual delivery and making of the products. Yeah. So I think it's, in a simple way to say is there's a culture, a supply chain culture. Yeah. Yes?
For companies that have software products that don't tend to have any tangible product, is there any application for supply chain theory?
Yeah, very much so. I talked to, I think in the global operations course, we actually have some discussions of companies such as Amazon and also eBay type of companies, where the way you organize your software could be the way you organize your software maybe in a modular structure so that you can easily be flexibly customize the products as you enter into the China market or India market. So you'll be able to quickly customize your products, which would enable you to fit the needs of the local markets and also have fast delivery. So I think software has similar, even though it's not tangible, physical products, but you do need to have this type of speed. You do need to have this flexibility and responsibility. And even in the software case, you cannot be just by yourself. You have partners. You need partners. And so you also have to align the interests of the partners. In the case of Amazon, of course, the U.S. Postal Service, UPS type of companies that they have to worry about the actual delivery. And Amazon, when they went to Japan, they have to partner with a convenience store, a very successful venture. Today, Amazon just broke $1 billion mark in Japan. And the success of in Japan is not just purely e-commerce sales for Amazon. It's a very successful partnership with the convenience store so that customers would go to the web to order products and pick up products after you have ordered from Amazon and pay also at the convenience store. So there's a very interesting partnership model. Now you have to make sure that the convenience store are rewarded adequately in order for them to be willing to be your last mile. But again, it means that software companies cannot live on only themselves. You may have also to use partners. We have in our current course, in the strategy course, we talk about Intuit, which also require partnerships with other companies to provide an extended service of financial services, mortgage, and IPR. And of course, not every such deal they have done well, have been producing results. But again, we cannot live in a kind of a single enterprise mode. You do need this alignment. So I think software, very much software service, have very similar principle, except it may not be as physically tangible. Yeah. Very good. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.